This is my heater. I dare you to hit it.
He'll be sorry.
Want the heater? I'll give it to you.
Basketball, maybe they don't hit it.
A swing and a drive to deep right.
Clear the deck. Cannonball coming.
Left field. It is out of here.
What up? What's good? Baseball Unstitched. We are back doing this for the second time here because grinding to a halt is not what's happening to the Major League Baseball season. However, we are coming to the end of the regular season. A ton of teams still in the mix. Something we will be talking about here in the middle of the show today. We're also going to be talking about some GM openings this offseason, the difference between a general manager position that is a number one and a number two, and also our thoughts on some of these positions. And finally, Anthony Rizzo finally decided to call it a career and hang up the hat. We've been talking about him all year as a potential guy who could have helped a playoff team, but he's hanging up the cleats. However, where we always start, Flax, how was the weekend?
Weekend was good. First weekend in a while without baseball. I was back home playing about as much golf as I could within a weekend. Played with my dad, played with my mom. It was good. Weekend as a whole was as you would want it to be on a middle of September day when the Commanders were not playing a football game.
Yeah, I'm with that. After that Thursday night performance, too, I think you and I were ready to take a big breather there. Our guy Jaden Daniels coming up with a potential knee injury. Not a lot of fun. Oh, geez, I was on call for work this weekend, so we just won't go into what my weekend was like. I don't think we need to. But Flax, rather than talking about weekends, tell us what happened this week in baseball.
Well, before I go into that, I do want to give a preemptive apology. As you can probably tell, I am a little stuffed up. So if there are any sniffles on the mic, I apologize. I'm going to do my best to keep them to a minimum. But this week, I noticed something, and I thought maybe I noticed one thing, but it was another. We currently have 15 players with 20 home runs and 20 stolen bases. This past week, Lawrence Butler was the latest one to join that club from the Athletics. But 15 is actually 4 shy of the same amount we've had in the last 2 seasons. Guys that are close maybe could get us into that territory. Shohei Ohtani, Jackson Chourio need 2 more stolen bases. Shohei's trying not to steal as many bases this year. He got hurt in the playoffs last year. Not looking to do that to himself. A guy that I think will absolutely help our total is Wyatt Langford. Needs 1 more stolen base to get to 2020. Josh Naylor, Gerardo Perdomo, I'll never say that name correctly. Ellie De La Cruz, O'Neal Cruz all need 1 more home run. And Bryce Terang needs 2 more bombs to get over the hump. So plenty of guys out there left to get us to that number 19 of 2020 guys in 2025. A couple debuts this week. Zachary Cole debuted for the Astros. He's an outfielder. Went 3 for 4 with a home run, 4 RBIs, 2 runs scored. It's a heck of a debut in Houston. Connolly Early pitched for the Boston Red Sox. Pitched in the sack against the Athletics. Tough place to pitch. Went 5 innings, no runs, 11 Ks. Took home the W. And Bryce Eldridge recently got called up by the San Francisco Giants, has been absolutely tearing it up in Double and Triple A this year. 20-plus bombs, 75-plus RBIs. Good bit of swing and miss in there. Hits a ton of ground balls. Trying to see what they can do about getting the ball elevated a little bit more. But if you know me, you know it just kind of happens. Swinging at better pitches. Also this week, the Mets continue to lose. I don't really understand what's happening. Their big 3, I'd say Alonso, Lindor, and Soto, not doing necessarily enough, but the really big story there is their bullpen has been atrocious. Since the 1st of September, the Mets ranked 4th in Ks offensively, 19th in home runs offensively, and then 28th in ERA, 26th in walks allowed, and are allowing a whopping 294 batting average against in the month of September. And the month of September, it has all fallen apart for them. The Giants, D-backs, and Reds are still chasing them down with a few weeks to go. 1.5 games, 2 games, and 2.5 games, respectively. Again, that was the Giants, the D-backs, and the Cincinnati Reds. Also, on the AL, Texas and Cleveland quietly chasing down that third wild card spot. Not sure who it's going to be, whether it's Houston or Seattle, but Seattle, as of September 15th when we're recording this, owns a one-game lead in the AL West, so chasing down the Houston Astros. It is not surprising because that's what these two teams do. They hang around. But we're going to go into a little bit more later in the episode about what these teams are going to need to continue doing or what they're going to need to clear up going down this next stretch of 2 weeks to get themselves over the hump and into the postseason. And then the last thing here, last week's Players of the Week, Joe Adell and Hunter Goodman out of the Angels and the Rockies. Unbelievable season from both of them. Really cool to see Joe Adell finally figure out what it is to be a big league hitter, show the power that he's got, 30-plus bombs. Hunter Goodman, 30-plus bombs. Could be a really big piece for a Rockies team that is not shy on offense, but I'd like to see, now that we know he can hit, him take a little bit more of a leadership role behind the plate and turn that pitching staff into something that churns in a competitive team. So that's this week in baseball. This week, I do not have a this day in baseball history because I forgot. That's on me. But maybe I'll have one by the end of the show. Who knows?
We'll leave some room for you to have one by the end of the show. Only add to your situation is the situation here with This Week in Baseball is the Boston Red Sox only have an additional one game over the Houston Astros in the playoff race right now. Conley early, try to say that 10 times fast, and Peyton Tooley coming up at the current moment is awesome. Tooley, yep, I heard it, as always. Either way, one day I will get names right, and I apologize to all of the fine gentlemen whose names I have butchered.
When you say it, you know what I think of? I think of, like, this is going to be, my mom's going to laugh at this. I think about the tool that's on, like, wedding dresses. That's the first thing I think of when you say Peyton Tooley. And I then imagine Peyton Tooley in a wedding dress, and that's an uncomfortable image to have in my head. So we can keep moving.
Peyton, we're sorry, but we'd love to have you on the pod. Either way, moving right into topic number one, something near and dear to Mr. Roster Construction over here. There are some GM openings that we're going to see this offseason. The biggest
and apply for?
I would love to apply. I have not nearly the actual in-work experience that they would like, but I like to think I do a pretty good job because for the first about 6 months, I do nothing but learn what was going on within the org and then start making large decisions. And ironically, that would be doable if you have the right number 2 under you. And we're going to talk about why that matters. So Flax, good transition right there.
Sure.
The first thing I think we want to talk about, and it's something for you guys to understand, is the general manager position is no longer always what we would consider the number 1 for the baseball ops side of teams. It's one of the reasons why you see guys jump between organization to organization, even if that general manager role is still the one they hold. So for sake of doing this right now, the best group that I'll use is the Cubs because we're going to talk about them a little bit today. Jed Hoyer is the president of baseball operations. Jed Hoyer is, in turn, the number 1 of that organization. His current general manager, or his number 2, is Carter Hawkins. One of the reasons Hawkins' name is going to come up so much this offseason, especially for roles like the Washington Nationals general manager position, which is, by definition for them, the number 1 of their org, an opportunity for Carter. That would actually be an elevation in title, not a lateral move for him, even though he is technically speaking the general manager of the Cubs right now. So now that you have a little bit better of an understanding of that, we're going to dive right into currently the only number 1 role that we know is opening this offseason, and that is with the Washington Nationals. For those of you who don't already know, the Nationals moved on from Mike Rizzo this year. He had been the guy leading that front office for the last 16 years. His tenure came with a lot of highs and a lot of lows, with the Nationals winning the 2019 World Series under his wing. However, they also have one of the worst stretches in the history of drafting in the MLB, a 10-year stretch of which they did not have a single player have a 1 WAR or higher who they drafted at the major league level throughout that time span. So that's a little bit roller coastery. We're going to start very simply here, Flax, and that's your thoughts on what Mike Rizzo did with the Washington Nationals organization.
I think, and we've talked about this a good bit, and if you haven't listened to it, we had a whole episode right after Mike Rizzo was relieved of duties of what he was able to accomplish and where he may have gone wrong. I think it's on the broad scale, you look at this organization and what they have now coming up. He did a great job of trading assets when he had assets to trade. And I think the beauty of it is he has built what is now the Nationals' window opening core. And I think on the flip side of that, there's a level at which with that core, you tend to have pieces that you drafted that play roles in that development. You have international signings that generally fit within that organization. And you build a pipeline of players that take you to that next level. And when I look at the organization as a whole, I don't necessarily see that in remnants of Rizzo. What I think is most fascinating is he created a little bit of what Mike DiBartolo has been, right? A guy who is willing to make quick moves, have a little bit of a quick trigger when he wants to do something, and a guy who takes ownership of the situation because he's been around it for so long. A guy who is pretty autonomous in his thinking, but still has the remnants of how Rizzo likes to build a ball club, right? There is a level at which the Eli Willits #1 overall selection going under slot to go get another guy feels very similar to what Rizzo may have done in past drafts outside of his other #1 overall picks that were, no question consensus 1-1s. His other opportunities to draft high were not outside this normalcy. It's kind of what you have to do when you work within an organization that isn't wanting to throw up large amounts of money. And now that we have slot values and all those things, it changes the way the game is played. I think the last piece I really have on Rizzo is that, and why I agree with you, it might be a little detrimental to keep going after guys that have scouting backgrounds, is that is Rizzo's background. And I think scouting background is great in some sense for a GM. I think other senses for a GM, it pulls you into deep for each individual player. It makes it hard to build an individual or a holistic roster because you're so intently focused on each individual player. I think if you pull back to somebody who is a little bit more focused on the holistic picture, which is where you tend to see people now moving into president of baseball operations, guys who focus more on the analytical side and these statistical models of where guys fit within a larger roster construction, that tends to be and has shown to be a little bit more successful within the last 10 years. So it's interesting, right? You look back at that 2019 team. One of the most fascinating pieces of it is it's very different than you would look at a scout to put together because it is a mix of young guys who probably played above level for the expectation of where they were at. But then on the flip side, there were a bunch of guys on that team that had been in the league for a while and were role players, but they were role players because they were towards the end of their tenure. You have to have both, and those analytical guys tend to build more of a holistic roster construction because of the lens they look through.
I don't want to spend too much time on Rizzo outside of what we have because I could go on about Rizzo for the next 3 hours, and you and I both know it. I think where I leave it with Mike is he did a good job with what he had. I don't feel he was excellent at holding talent, and I feel like his track record at trading talent was either he traded it for everything you could possibly want, or he made it look like it was everything you could possibly want, and it didn't come to fruition in any way, shape, or form. So let's move into this, though. You talked about Mike DiBartolo, and he is the incumbent, the interim general manager that the Washington Nationals have signed. He comes with a little bit different of a background, like you talked about. He's got a bit of an analytical background. He started as a baseball ops intern, was part of Cambridge consulting firm prior to coming over. He's held titles in the organization such as baseball operations assistant manager, as the baseball operations assistant manager, manager of baseball research and development, and director of baseball operations. Wow, that's a mouthful. So Where I do get with this is, yes, he had a little bit of what I would think is a different play at the top of the draft here with Willits and cost savings at 1. One of the things Rizzo never did was save at 1. It was always take the guy who you believe is the dude. Doesn't matter, we're going to pay him the cost. I am not a huge fan of saving at 1, but I do like what he came out of it, which is going to get Landon Harmon, Miguel Syme Jr., and Coy James on overslot deals later in the draft, and not turning it into one guy, but turning that savings into 3 guys. He is a 10-year veteran of Mike Rizzo's cohort, and he has learned a lot from Rizzo. The willingness to do something different early is what I think I really, really liked about what I saw from DiBartolo. He took the bull by the horns immediately and said, this is the way I want to drive the ship, and did not allow pre-cursor situations to dictate how he was going to drive his ship. He strikes me as a guy who I think should have a really good opportunity to hold this role. I think it's all going to be whether or not ownership wants any thought process that Rizzo had still within this organization.
I think what's hard is, like, if you pull back and you try and find a parallel to this in any other business sense, there's a level at which, if you look at the Nationals as a Fortune 500 company, this is the conversation of, how does the board replace their CEO? Does the board go find an outside candidate who has a new style of focus and behaves differently and shakes things up so that the market reacts positively, right? Think about the fans. If you bring in somebody from the outside who's done it, been there somewhere else, that might get the fans excited. It might get the organization excited. On the flip side, you bring somebody in from the outside world who doesn't understand the culture of the business, doesn't understand the culture of the organization, and shakes things up to the point where you lose the interest of some of your premier players or some of your premier employees in this parallel we're talking about. There's a sense at which DiBartolo might be the guy, because DiBartolo has lived and breathed the Nationals from intern all the way up now to what is essentially the highest and most impactful position in putting the team on the field. There's a cultural aspect there that could really benefit what the Nationals are trying to turn things into within the window that already exists. If you were outside of a window, if a window had just closed, I'd say move on, clean house, refresh, culture, everything from the start. But considering the situation the Nationals are in, that you could take 1 or 2 of the correct steps this offseason with this guy who clearly understands what the path was to get here, tells me that he might be the right person to keep in the seat for now.
I also think one of the big things with DiBartolo, no matter what happens on the front of who actually is the number 1, I think it's extremely important that the Nationals find a way to pay him enough to keep him within the organization. Because one of the things that I always look at, and again using the real world sense, is when you bring in talent from the outside world to run departments, one of the most important things that person can do coming in is learn from people who are already part of the internal culture. And you have to have your internal champions who get that culture, understand that culture, to very quickly bring somebody up to speed. So moving from DiBartolo, who I do agree right now should be the front runner, it's just how it works. There are a lot of interesting names that are available, and somebody who we've already mentioned and is going to get probably the most headlines, I equate him to being the Adam Peters of the 2025-2026 executive cycle in baseball, and that's Carter Hawkins. This is a guy who is a very well-known commodity in the industry. He's been Jed Hoyer's number 2 since 2021-2022 season. This is a guy who started with the Cleveland Guardians. He worked with them from 2009 to 2021, roles anywhere between an advanced scouting intern, a full-time scout, assistant director of baseball development, director of baseball development, and of course, he was also at one point in time an assistant GM for the Cleveland Guardians. Again, I said well known in the industry. In 2020, I believe it was 22 or 23, he was named the 2015, he was named the most young and upcoming baseball executive by Sports Illustrated. Again, Hawkins comes with this very, very solid track record, only 41 years old. Flax, I look at him as the high upside play no matter how you put it here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because he doesn't technically have the number one role experience, but he has the makings of a guy who could really handle himself in this role.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting, right, is he's not a young guy, right? And I'm not sitting here saying 41 is old, but like it's not a Theo Epstein type hire where you're totally flipping things on its head. Like it's a guy that does have a good bit of experience, right? You're not just totally trying to shift the mojo or the way you handle things. I think the hard thing for me again in calling him the upside is there that much more upside than DiBartolo brings? And I don't know. I don't know that that's truly the case.
But let me tell you something that I like here about Hawkins, and I think is one of the things that people look at his resume and I think is very important. And it's something I've learned of recent and over time. These baseball development roles are not just about developing the player on the field, but it's developing the relationship with the player, their family, how they develop and mature off the field as much as they develop and mature on the field. I think a guy who has had to have that direct experience with players on a regular basis and like really dive deep into everything that's important to them, I think that level of understanding is something not that DiBartolo doesn't have, but it does bring a little bit of a different version of what he has. I think DiBartolo has done this to help develop guys on that analytical side and analytical sense of baseball. I think that Hawkins has done it on a personal level. And at 41 years old, that's part of where I say there's a lot of upside here, because you're talking about a guy who you could plug and play for the next 20 plus years, no matter who you are, if it goes the right direction.
No, I don't disagree with you there. I think it's how much do you value the relationship side of doing that job? I know you as an individual and me as well, we value it very highly. But there are teams that have won a World Series and multiple World Series within the last 10 years that don't believe in that at all and almost dehumanize their entire roster down to numbers and have found a way to pull those together and make it work into a winning combination. So there's two sides to the same coin. It's a matter of how you choose you want to run your organization. And this is part of what the ownership group of the Nationals and the learners are going to have to make a decision on. And I think a large part of it is how much control and say do they get in that movement, right? DiBartolo might be their guy because they feel like they have a better relationship at their level and the care is less about his relationship further down the chain. Hawkins might scare them a little bit. And I don't mean that to say they don't want to win or they don't want to do things differently or they don't want to run and gun. But if you've watched what the learners have done and how they have operated the Nationals forever, you would probably agree that they're okay trying to be a mid-market team that takes a back seat and hopefully puts together a pretty magical roster at some point with a couple of top-tier talents that they drafted, or in this case now traded for, and could potentially turn out a World Series run. In their mind, it has happened. It can happen again. That is what we are playing towards. I think Carter Hawkins brings a level of unpredictability to them that leads me to believe DiBartolo ends up being the guy because there's a level of comfort that comes with it.
I can understand that. I think that we have a group from an ownership perspective, a perspective in DC that has talked a lot about the fact that spending money and not spending money hasn't been because they didn't green light it. That's a very interesting statement. It's hard to really read through those lines. The last thing that I would sweep up here with Carter Hawkins is, as much as I say he's a high upside play, I also believe all high upside plays come with generally the most downside, right? He is a volatile commodity, and I think that's where you're going. And that statement I do agree with the fact that I think he has this high upside of, this is your lightning in a bottle if you're the Nationals. I think Hawkins is the guy people are going to look at throughout this process if they're looking to hire a number one, because he is the most intriguing available name to a lot of people, especially with 41 being at the end of the day a younger age in this business. Let's move on to some other additional names here. Josh Burns has been around for quite a while. He's the senior VP. He's a senior VP for the Los Angeles Dodgers at the current moment. Has been in baseball since 1994. Fun fact for you, Flax. His career started with Rob Shapiro. the father of former Guardians and current Blue Jays president of baseball operations, Mark Shapiro. He's worked with 6 organizations over his 36 years in baseball. This is a guy who through 2006 to 2010 was the number 1 for the Arizona Diamondbacks. And when you really look at the production that he brought to that group, was probably dethroned a little bit quicker than he should have been. I know there was some organizational changes. Burns is the guy who brought in A.J. Hinch. Throughout 2006 to 2010, we talked about how Mike Rizzo, in a 10-year span, didn't bring 1 WAR to the Washington Nationals of a drafted player. Well, he produced 195 WAR by the conclusion of the 2020 draft. Those, the names that he drafted that went on to have great careers start at the top with Max Scherzer and Paul Goldschmidt. Again, this is experience. I mean, if the Nationals wanted to go with a guy who has been there, done that, no questions asked, I could see Burns being extremely high on their list. And right now, with the fact that you have a developed young core at the highest level, this could be something that's comfortable for the learners.
Can I tell you something that I find so fascinating in this whole conversation? And this isn't necessarily have to go around Josh Burns. I think it's so fascinating that none of these guys we ever talk about are guys that played the game at the highest level. And I think for me and you, we talk about how relationship is so important. But you look at the list of GMs that exist and assistant GMs that exist and POBOs and president of baseball operations, for those of you that don't know what that means. A lot of Ivy League grads that think very businesslike about the people underneath them and what value they hold. It is very fascinating to me. It's almost like the thought process is former players are going to think too closely to the game. And so when you talk about, right, the idea of going back to the conversation we were having with Hawkins and just across the board, when you think of these guys and how they approach the situation, we are still leaning towards GMs and executives that dehumanize the players. And I don't mean that in a bad way, like they're treating them like objects. But on paper, they are treating them as numbers, from the sense of they're making my decision, they're making it easier for me to see it as black and white, make a decision based on the numbers that I know work, do not work, have value to me, do not have value to me. Whatever I am left with, I am left with. And I categorize it by what I need to be on the field by position, batting order, value of success, runs, wins, whatever you want to calculate it as. Everybody has different things. I just think across the board, it's so fascinating. It's very rarely a guy who has been there, done that at the playing level. It's much more somebody who has been within the front office since they left college, didn't play the game at a high level, and more or less removes the game of baseball from the decision-making of the people put on the baseball field.
Yeah, listen, as a guy who wants the opportunity to help make these decisions, who did not play baseball at the highest level for all intents and purposes, I do think that there is a portion of this where the business side of baseball in the front office is different. And I think it's about how you balance out those two thought processes. We've talked about some of the guys, for example, that we know who have helped the White Sox in their organization who are professionals. And the thought process with those guys, and I'm not here to name names that maybe we shouldn't give out, but the thought process with how their opinions are looked at and thought about is a very interesting situation to hear about, right? Because their playing careers have made them think a specific way, very different, maybe even from the couple of pro guys that they have in the conversation and in the room at any point in time. But at the end of the day, it is coming down to guys who do nothing but roster construction, baseball operations, and how do we put the best product on the field. I think you see many baseball players who are in these roles right now, a Buster Posey, a Chris Young, who got himself a World Series recently, who get those opportunities and chances. I also think they are similar to players who end up being managers, which I get that you see more often. They've always had an aptitude or want to be in this space, and the fact that they did play gives them an opportunity. I think you see a lot more players striving for the on-field vibe more than you see the front office vibe, and I think that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, they want to wear baseball pants, not khaki pants.
I can't blame him. I can't blame him. So
No, I agree.
before we move on real quick, Josh Burns, it's another name that you're going to hear in this conversation and discussion. He did a lot of great things with the Diamondbacks. Many people felt he was ahead of his time in retrospect after he had an opportunity to be there and laid the groundwork for some of these very successful Diamondbacks teams that you saw during the 2010s. Another name you're going to hear, Amiel Saudet, the assistant GM for the Diamondbacks, started his career with the Boston Red Sox in 3, has gone through, again, the scouting route that we see a lot, was a director of amateur scouting for the Boston Red Sox for 7 years. When the Red Sox front office had a change, he did follow Mike Hazen over to the Arizona Diamondbacks in 2016 to be his number 1. He's been there ever since. He's credited a lot for some of the impact that he's made, helping them hold on to guys like Corbin Carroll and Tony Lavello after their World Series run. This is another guy with a lot of experience that I expect you're going to see get play throughout the market this year and has already been asked by the Washington Nationals to be interviewed.
Yeah, and first of all, credit to you. Nailed that name. Gotta listen. If I'm gonna correct you when you get them wrong, I gotta give you props when you get them right. But again, I think this is just another guy where you look at what's the next direction forward, and it's a guy who has some experience, can fit within the world of a similar style ball club to the Arizona Diamondbacks, right? Middle of the road type of financial contender, building a roster through the means of a less expensive direction. It's all about finding guys who are comfortable within the model. Talk about this a lot with Mike Elias and the Orioles. Talk about it a lot with a guy like Andrew Freeman and the Dodgers. Two very different paths, but for good reason. Guys who are willing to run and gun a little bit, with the Dodgers having the financial backing that he's had from the Guggenheim Group for a while. Mike Elias on the flip side, coming from the Astros, very similar space. They don't give out a lot of long extended contracts. They don't spend high dollars of money. It's much more focused on building the roster construction around guys who can play their part and who should stay healthy enough to stick around for a long time. I think that Saudet is much more in the realm from his time with the Diamondbacks, what the Nationals could see as a really good fit because it makes a lot of sense. He's done it in one place, could do it in this place. It is very similar style of what you're trying to build. I think the nice thing is his experience in two very different types of organizations could help him find a balance. The other piece I see is he may be another opportunity to fit with the Nats ownership that doesn't provide an element of unpredictability, like I talked about with Hawkins, but isn't a guy that they've been around for a long time, so it's a breath of fresh air. That's why I think a guy like this could squeeze in and take the spot over some other guys like a DiBartolo who has the incumbency, and Hawkins who maybe is your highest upside value player in the market.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's levels of which he fits. I think he's a name that's come up that is definitely intriguing, but also deserves to be there. I think that's the biggest piece that I look at throughout this situation is if I'm the ownership group of the Nationals right now, I'm looking for the most highly qualified people to simply bring in for an interview and then make decisions from there. That sounds like the most simple statement anybody has ever made, but guess what, guys? This is still business at the end of the day. And all I've seen through the names that the Nationals have asked to talk to is guys who fit the criteria and criteria and qualifications, and they're going to go out and take a look and see who wows them, doesn't wow them, and then make the best decision they possibly can and really let it ride from there.
Again, this is not very different from Fortune 500 executives. There's only a select few people that actually fit into these roles based on the time spent in service. The way you become a part of that group is doing a little bit of what Mike DiBartolo has done. You work your way up into assistant GM roles and that lead assistant GM role long enough that you become looked at as a candidate of a person who will be a GM one day, right? That is the nomenclature that we use, is the guy does a really good job as an AGM, enough so that he's actually known, gets to speak on the behalf of the work he's put in to help said GM. And then the conversation is, that's a guy who will be a GM one day. And then when that one day comes, a guy gets let go or a guy retires and spots open up either within their own organization or others, they're already a part of that collective opportunistic group. 90% of the guys who are within that opportunistic group have a job already and aren't going anywhere. They're already a president of baseball operations somewhere else. They're already a GM somewhere else. They're already an AGM somewhere where they're not ready to leave. So it's always going to be a small window of guys that are going to be looked at for these types of roles, which is why you end up seeing some very similar candidates across the board for some different organizations.
I totally agree. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens here. Again, this is hiring, at least in the Nationals case, the guy who's going to be your number one for the next X amount of years. We're going to go into real quickly here a couple of number two roles that two of them we know are open, one that we expect to be open. We're not going to take a ton of time on these, but definitely want to talk about it. One piece that we need to talk about prior to talking about what we consider the number two roles or GM roles that are under a president of baseball operations is the fact that certain candidates will not be able to be interviewed for these jobs because MLB teams have to request to interview other executives. And if it is not a position that would be a true promotion for those executives, they will normally get denied by the club who holds that executive under contract. So let me give you an example. And we're going to start with Craig Breslow and the Boston Red Sox, who they were announced were going to be looking for a general manager to be under Craig Breslow, who is, again, their POB. If Breslow wanted to hire Carter Hawkins, he would go to the Cubs. He would say, I want to interview Carter Hawkins for my number two job. And the Cubs would say, that's not an increase in title or position for him. We are denying your request to interview Carter Hawkins in most scenarios. Why? Because Carter Hawkins is already a general manager and already the number two behind Jed Hoyer. So there's your real life example of why a team would deny another for interviewing one of their executives, and also shows you exactly why the Nationals in an interview request will get a yes from the Cubs, because it would in fact be a step up from Hawkins. Craig Breslow was looking to fill this role for the Red Sox potentially last year. He did run an audit throughout the entire organization after joining to really start evaluating what type of talent they had internally. The expectation was assistant GM Paul Tabani was the number one candidate to take over the general manager role, or the number two behind Breslow. At the end of the day, he did not end up hiring anybody for that role and went into this season without a quote-unquote general manager. Taboni is still right now considered the front runner potentially, but Breslow's had a full year with the organization. That number two role is going to be open and available. Taboni is also expected to be in the mix for other roles such as the Nationals role and opportunity. He's another guy who comes from the scouting side of baseball and player development side of baseball. Flax, unless you have anything on Breslow and his team, the Orioles, Mike Elias, the new president of baseball operations.
I wanted to add something to the understanding of the number two versus number one role.
Perfect.
I don't know if people remember this. Back in 2023, the Marlins made the playoffs. Kim Ng was the GM at the time. There was no president of baseball operations. The team was sold. The guy who bought the team basically came in and said, I think I'm going to add a president of baseball operations. The general rule of thumb in that situation would be the general manager who just took you to the playoffs after being a bad team should be moved into that position, and you replace her with a new general manager. Instead, basically the conversation was, hey, we're going to hire a president of baseball operations above you. She said, thank you, I will decline my option and I will do something else with my life. So again, understanding that the general manager role and what we call it holds different value at different places depending on where they go. Again, this is a very similar situation, and the reason I bring it up is it's a good transition into what just happened in Baltimore. Mike Elias, who was brought on as the GM in 2018, got moved into the president of baseball operations role very quietly this offseason, and there was no announcement about it. Again, these aren't roles that you tend to move people in in short order because the goal is that they're in these roles for an extended period of time. So my guess is that they've been looking at different people as the season has gone on. They wanted to see how different people's contracts would shake out in different organizations. I would not be shocked if a guy like a Carter Hawkins is within that conversation, but given what you have already talked about, it's not anything more than a lateral move for him. So I'd be shocked if that was the direction. The incumbent to move into that role is Sig. I'm going to butcher his last name. Sig Mejdal. He's former NASA scientist. I don't know that really matters much, but it just goes along the same lines of like, this guy got into baseball because he read Bill James's book, fell in love with sabermetrics and the statistical side of baseball, and then joined Mike Elias in Houston when they won a World Series. And Sig's claim to fame within the AGM role is that he built a statistical model to predict the health of his players and the guys that they should go get around whether or not they would stick for an entire season of use, and how valuable how much value that added to the credibility of a player on top of their baseball talent. Obviously, when you look at what the Astros have dealt with the last couple of years, what the Orioles have dealt with this year, the model needs a little bit of tweaking. But Sig is a guy who spent a lot of time with the Cardinals and their analytics department before making his way to Houston. With Baltimore now, has been the catalyst for Baltimore for a lot of their drafting, alongside what he did in Houston in his time there. Very good at drafting what becomes the young core of a Major League Baseball team. I would not be shocked to see him move into that role, but if he doesn't, I would also not be shocked to see him not with the Orioles. The Orioles just hired Danny Haas as the lead assistant GM, telling me that Sig is definitely not going to be the assistant GM when this is all said and done. Danny Haas was with the Orioles with Dan Duquette from 2012 to 2018, and then with Mike Rizzo from 2018 to now 2025. He just flipped over to the Orioles a good 2 weeks ago. There's not much to say here other than Mike Elias is going to make his decisions, interview his people, and we are going to know zero information of it until a decision gets made and the Orioles tweet about it. That is the way that Mike Elias rolls. Every single one of the beat reporters will be knocking down doors to try and figure out any information they can, and there will be no information to find. That is how this works. Other teams do not operate that way. I would think that the Nationals and the Red Sox conversations will be much more had in the public eye because it's just the way they roll. They're more comfortable talking to their beat reporters and letting those words be on the street.
Yeah, I can't say anything different than what you said about how the Orioles will go about the process here. That's Mike Elias with everything. I think that watching this from the outside, 2025 has been a heavy blip on the radar, has a lot to do with injuries. I think Elias has done an extremely good job with that organization. Not surprised that he was promoted to the Povo. At the end of the day, I do also expect this to be an internal hire for Elias. I think that one of the things that he has shown is he will reward people internally to the organization if he possibly can, and if it makes the most sense. So excited to see what they do. The last one we're not going to spend a ton of time on, but just as a reminder, we've talked a lot about how the fact that Carter Hawkins will probably not be with the Chicago Cubs. That effectively is probably going to open up their GM role, aka the number 2 role under Jed Hoyer. So when Carter Hawkins decides to go elsewhere, if Carter Hawkins decides to go elsewhere, expect to hear a little bit of that position as well. Also, there are multiple teams who could very well move on from executives and front office, high-level front office talent this year. So do expect more roles to be open by the time the winter meetings come in November. I leave it with this. I'm available for work, just in case anybody's curious. And I mean that, flat out. All right, now that I've gotten that out of the way, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let's move on to the next topic here. Flax, there are a few teams here, and there was a couple teams who decided to do something on Saturday and Sunday to make sure that they needed to be added to this list today.
Yes. Yes.
We don't even have numbers on them because we didn't ask Jackson for them because they weren't winning ball games, and then they won enough and the other teams lost enough that there's 2 more names that came into the mix here. But Let's start with the NL and that wild card race, because unfortunately the New York Mets can't seem to find the surface. They are drowning at the current moment. It is not pretty. And this is with Juan Soto playing quite well at the current moment, too. He's not getting a ton of help, but the ball's going over the fence at the moment. The Giants, the Reds, the Diamondbacks, they're all in the hunt right now. Let's talk about these guys, starting with the Giants. What do they need to do to stay in the race here?
Oh, I will start with this. The Giants and Diamondbacks need to not beat each other up this week. They play 3 games against each other, and then they don't see each other for the rest of the year. The reality of the situation is if the Diamondbacks can go 2-1 in that series, it kind of leaves everyone evened out with, hopefully for the fans of baseball, the Mets not winning many games within that 3-game stretch. The next piece there for the Giants is going to be a little bit of a tough sled. You have the Dodgers, who are finally starting to play better baseball. You have the Cardinals, who, for all Cardinals fans that hate how their season is going, your season's not been that bad. You're not that far out of it, even still. You could go on an 8-game win streak and all of a sudden be in a wild card spot. Your pitching staff probably doesn't give you the ability to go on an 8-game winning streak right now, but that reality exists. Across the board, this team needs to keep hitting the baseball. We've been talking about it all year. The Matt Chapmans, the Willie Adameses, even the Patrick Baileys of the world need to hit the baseball. If they're not hitting the baseball, this is not a pitching staff that's going to overcome it. You have a Robbie Ray who is at best a mid-3 to a high 4 in the rotation. A Logan Webb who is probably one of the best number 2s in baseball and shows ace stuff here and there, but the two of them just had really bad outings the other day. When you look across the board, they gave away a couple of bullpen pieces that would have been really helpful down the stretch here. This is going to be the biggest uphill battle for any of these 3 teams. They all traded players away at the deadline. There's no other way to put it. They gave pieces away. They are fighting for their lives every single day with a team that is not made up of the superstars they started it with.
And you know what, looking at all of them, including the Reds here, with 4 series left, they both have what I would consider 2 very strong opponents who are in the mix at the current moment, and 2 opponents who are either outside looking in or a group that you should have an opportunity to sweep. This is really, really simple. I think for these 3 teams, it comes down to who wins the games that they're supposed to. And then in the case of the Giants and the Diamondbacks, it's who can find a way to beat the crap out of the other in this first series that we're about to talk about. I think the Giants having the Dodgers is a very difficult situation to go through, but the Reds, who are 2.5 games back, also have to play 4 versus the Cubs and 3 versus the Brewers. It's not as if they have a road that's a little bit better for them as well. When I look at the Giants, I agree with you. It is all about them hitting. Through September, they're slashing 267, 338, 475 with a 126 WRC plus as a team. I think that is exactly what could propel the Giants to catch the Mets and find themselves a playoff spot. The starters, though they have had some starts that haven't been great, are running to a 2.77 FIP. It tells me that the guys who are supposed to keep the ball on the ground are, which is very important. The Giants really probably do hinge on bullpen consistency, something that they have not had. When I look at the Reds, who do have an opportunity here, I see a group of guys who they have been finding a way to get on base, but they're not very impactful with the bat at the current moment. An 87 WRC plus in September with a 25% K rate is not going to find them a way into the playoffs. And it's one of the reasons why they've dropped behind the Diamondbacks now, and they've lost their 3 straight. On the flip side, they do have a couple guys who are just absolutely carrying the entirety of the ship in September, and they need some help. Will Benson has finally found his sea legs. He's got a 327 WRC plus and is hitting over 400 so far this month. Matt McClain, who we've been waiting to really turn it on, has turned it on in August and September. TJ Friedel is healthy. Connor Phillips has thrown great across 6.2 innings for them. And oh, by the way, Brady Singer sneaking in there. His last 12 innings throwing to the tune of a 2.25 ERA and had a very solid August.
I don't want to zoom past Brady Singer just in general here, Brady Singer has pitched to a 3.94 ERA. He's sitting just shy of a home run per 9 in 29 starts. We're talking about a guy that for his entire career in a bigger ballpark has averaged way over a home run per 9 innings. And he has figured out a pitch mix that is keeping the ball on the ground, keeping walks at bay, keeping strikeouts where they need to be. Pitching to a 3.94 ERA over 29 starts and 155 innings is absolutely serviceable in today's game if you have an offense that can support it. He, by the way, has a lower FIP than ERA, which tells me he's getting a little bit unlucky as well on top of that. So it's one of those situations where you have the pieces, you gave some away, but guys like Sal Stewart playing well as the number one prospect, showing up, exactly what you'd expect out of him in his first 12 games in the big leagues, right? There's a little bit of hit, a little bit of miss. Still, I don't think has walked yet. So waiting to see him start to look for his pitches in the zone rather than just whatever he's given. But I understand how hard it is to make that transition. Will Benson finding it is phenomenal. But I think for the Reds, what it's really going to take is just a level of belief. And I know that sounds crazy, but they've got the right guy at the helm to get them over that hump. Because when you look at their remaining schedule, you have 3 versus the Cardinals this week. Right out of the gates, you could make a big difference. You got 4 against the Cubs. It's going to be a tough sled, but this late in the season, there's a chance that you don't have to see the best starters that the Cubs are putting together for the entire 7 innings they could potentially throw. As you get down towards the end of the season, these guys might not throw their full-out games. They may get pulled back a little bit because they're already in position to make the playoffs. They might even have a playoff spot lined up by then. You have 3 against Pittsburgh. That is a huge opportunity. And then you finish with 3 against the Milwaukee Brewers, who again, very well could be in a position where they've already clinched a playoff spot and could maybe not even throw their best arms, maybe not even throw or put out their best lineups, give you an opportunity to go win some games that would be normally tougher to win. I think if any of these 3 teams have the most opportunity in front of them, it truly is the Reds. They just have to show up and do something with it.
Well, you just asked my next question, so it sounds like the Reds are the team, even though they are the furthest back, technically speaking, of all these 3 teams that you think will make it. I'm going to take the San Francisco Giants as the group that I think will make it, and here's the reason why. I think that there's a very high probability that they could hit their way to it. I recognize that Webb and
Robbie
Ray. Wow, I just watched an entire wind-up of his in my head and couldn't spell his name. That was a real tough look there. The thing that you get with them plus Justin Verlander is you get a veteran 3. I think they're a group where they could do more damage actually in the playoff format than maybe that you've seen them do during the regular season. Also, the emergence of Jung-Hoo Lee, who I think as the grandson of the wind and having the best nickname in all of baseball, more than likely, if this is his emergence right here for what he can do, you're going to see a really, really solid stretch from him as well to go with what Chapman and Bailey have been doing of late. Let's move to the AL now. There's 2 teams chasing at the current moment on that side. Those 2 teams are technically chasing the Houston Astros, the Boston Red Sox, and the Seattle Mariners. The Texas Rangers find themselves 2 games out. The Cleveland Guardians find themselves 2.5 games out. This feels like a revolving door of those 2 teams always chasing at the end and almost always finding their way into the playoffs.
Yeah, and it's just playing good baseball at the right time. I mean, the Guardians are 9-1 in their last 10. They've got 4 wins in a row. When you look at what they've got up against them to finish things off, the Guardians, for all intents and purposes, have a really good opportunity in front of them, right? They've got, unfortunately, 6 against the Tigers, which is not going to be easy, but is a team that they've done fairly well against this year. You've got 4 against the Twins, 3 against the Rangers. There's a potential here that we have a really exciting series to finish the year, depending on how either Seattle or Houston plays. Right now, Houston is not playing their best baseball. Obviously, they got Yordan Alvarez back, but they're 4-6 in their last 10. They lost again yesterday. They got to go up against an in-state opponent in the Rangers, who they have not done very well against this year. when all is said and done, we could see by the end of this week this thing flipped completely on its head. But when you look at the Texas Rangers and what they're going to have to do to get over the line, it's going to have to rely on the starting pitching. You're talking about starters in September that are already pitching to a 3.32 ERA, a bullpen that's at a 3.03 ERA, less than a home run per 9. Hitters are not hitting well, but they've had a couple of guys who've showed up at the right time. Michael Hellman has been phenomenal. Journeyman, finding his slot here with the Rangers down the stretch, has been just hitting home runs at the right time. We're not talking about a solo shot in the 3rd inning. We're talking about the two-run, 3-run shots in the 6th, 7th inning that propel you into the bullpen and give you an opportunity to go win a game. You've got guys like Phil Maton who are throwing really well right now, Robert Garcia, Jacob Latz, guys who are taking the next step to get you over the hump. On top of that, Jake Berger is being Jake Berger, and we love to see it. Because we knew Jake Berger was a really good trade piece when the Rangers got him this offseason. Filled the gap at the first base slot for them, plays a good defense, but really hits the ball well. Already at a 174 WRC plus into September, slugging 676. So all this put together, they've got the pieces to get over the hump. Jacob deGrom looks about as good as Jacob deGrom looks, and they're taking advantage of the opportunities that they're given early in the game and then shutting games down late when they have the opportunity to close them out. Losing on the road, one of their last losses came on the road in New York against the Mets in the 10th, 11th inning. There's only so much you can do when you face Pete Alonso 6 times in a game and 15 times in a weekend, and he hasn't hit the ball well. He's due to connect with one. It is what it is. You move on and you play tomorrow. I think their opportunity going up against Houston to vie for a wild card spot before the end of this week is really, really pertinent and a great opportunity for a team that did this 2 years ago. Ended up being a buzzsaw through the playoffs, running their way all the way through the World Series.
Yeah, I'm really excited for the AL, and the reason why is actually because I think there's a possibility that we see both the Texas Rangers and the Cleveland Guardians make the playoffs.
Yeah.
And I think that's a shocking statement to many people. The Boston Red Sox have been dealing with injuries. The Houston Astros have been dealing with injuries. There's been a lot of inconsistency with both of those teams. I also want to remind people that the Astros have themselves a difficult road, as you've mentioned. The Boston Red Sox also have a very difficult set of series coming up for them to close it out. They've got 4 against the A's. The A's have won 4 straight games and are hitting the cover off of the baseball. They then go for 3 against the Tampa Bay Rays, who are very hungry and always willing to spoil an in-division rival's chances. They then have
now too.
3 against the Toronto Blue Jays, who again would love to not see the Red Sox in the playoffs. Interdivision, they don't probably want to see that team to begin with for a multitude of reasons. And then they finish with the Detroit Tigers, which the question will simply be in that series, are the Tigers rolling out any of their guys because of a potential playoff clinch? So I'm not here to count either of these teams out. The Guardians tend to do one thing extremely well every single year, and it's when it comes down to playoff time. They're 9-1 in their last 10. They've won 4 straight games. They play great defense and they play fundamental baseball, which makes them so hard to beat down the stretch. I think you could see that again. Parker Messick has come up and been an absolute force for that group. I think Gavin Williams, though he's had a couple off starts of recent, is another guy who's really had his coming out party here in 2025. My expectation is that the Guardians are in it to win it. And what could be more fun than anything is no, maybe we don't see both of these teams make the playoffs, but there's a very real possibility that the Guardians-Rangers series to end the season will dictate which of those teams does make the playoffs, which would be extremely fun to watch that 3-game set and kind of what I'm hoping for a little bit of dramatics.
It'd be pretty cool.
That's what I'm saying.
It'd be pretty cool.
Flax, between the Houston Astros, the Boston Red Sox, and the New York Mets, which of those teams does not make the playoffs?
Oh, I think the run ends. I think the Houston Astros do not make the playoffs.
I'm going to also agree with you. I'm going to stick with my guns here. I think the Mariners do end up winning the division, and I do believe this is a transitional year for the Astros, including the injuries. I don't believe we see them make the playoffs here in 2025. Mr. DeLong champs, just like you like it, we apologize for that statement. But, Jack, we love you to death, man. We're just not seeing it at the current moment. Let's move on to our final topic here. Anthony Rizzo retires. Flex, let's keep this to a nice homage? What would we call this here? This is a sail him off into the sunset. Homage? Something?
Homage?
Homage? Listen, you know I don't know these
Paying
words.
homage?
Homage.
That feels wrong.
Yeah.
A nice homage, I think is the right way to say it. Yeah.
Beautiful.
I mean, what can you say about the guy who caught the ball that ended the longest World Series drought in MLB history?
The Guardians fans really wanted him to drop it.
I think the Guardians fans had a better chance of it actually getting beaten out than him dropping a ball thrown directly to his chest.
The two longest stretches ever.
Yeah. When you really break it down across the board, you're talking about a guy who was an elite defender, an absolute force at the plate, a 3-time All-Star, played 14 seasons, finishing fourth 2 times in MVP voting, but all around just seemed to be a top-tier teammate and the kind of guy that you always wanted on the bench, was ready to be an advisor. But I also will say this, a guy who just spent so much time understanding the position he held as a professional baseball player within the community. You saw it in the way that he went about his retirement ceremony with the Cubs. Spent his time in the bleachers, not sitting in a box, not sitting down behind home plate, but sitting in the bleachers with the truest Cubs fans that exist, wearing a jersey signed by all the kids that he had signed this same jersey throughout his tenure with the Cubs at the Children's Hospital. Just the kind of guy who makes you wish you got to be a professional baseball player so you could have the same impact as he got to have around the community. And I think if there's nothing else you say about him and you leave all of his baseball abilities at the door, that impact that he had on the game, coming from the place he did, being a cancer survivor, really, I think just means a lot for what the younger guys get to see, look up to, and what we can point at and say, I want everyone to be the kind of person around the game that Anthony Rizzo was. So that is my homage to Anthony Rizzo as he retires from the game of Major League Baseball, at least as a player for now. See where he goes next.
I don't even know why I'm going to follow up that. That was great, Flex. Good work,
Thank you.
As always. Couple things that I want to add here that are just fun tidbits about his career. One, he was part of a very large trade for the Boston Red Sox. They sent Anthony Rizzo over to the San Diego Padres. And the big piece that the Red Sox pulled over, Adrian Gonzalez, a name many of you may be familiar with, another elite first baseman. The Padres didn't have much patience with Rizzo, which is one of the fun other pieces that we'll talk about here. In his time with the Padres, Rizzo hit 141, 281, and 242. Let's be very clear. That was in 150 plate appearances as a 21-year-old, so a lot of weight on him. They would immediately flip him to the Chicago Cubs, where he would blossom into the player we all know him to be now, which was an absolute force for the Cubs throughout their playoff runs, and then eventually a solid player for 2 years with the New York Yankees. And he really wasn't that poor his last 2 years. The wheels just started to come off from a standpoint of health. The other thing I do want to bring up with Rizzo before we leave it, what a stand I feel like he took this year for the veteran position player in deciding to do what he did, which is not take this very low-level league minimum contract just to put on a uniform. He did a lot of discussing about the fact that we don't have that thought process with pitchers, nor should we have that thought process with position players. Being in the fact that a guy who has been around the game for, in his case, 14 years, brings a lot to the clubhouse outside of just production on the field. I love that he was willing to make that stand. I love that he stuck to his guns. And again, I think we're losing an all-around great person and great player. But losing's the wrong word, because this feels like a guy who's probably going to stick around the game for a very long time. There you go. So, Anthony Rizzo, we appreciate you, and we hope you enjoy your retirement. Flax, closing thoughts on this Monday of recording.
Yes, this date in history, September 15th, 2010. For those that remember, Derek Jeter gave an Oscar-worthy performance at the plate, convincing home plate umpire's name I do not have, but a pitch thrown by Chad Qualls, for those of you that remember that name, hit the knob of the bat. Derek Jeter made a very demonstrative move to act like he was hit by the pitch, was awarded first base, and then upon review, a lot of very angry people around baseball questioning the ethics of Derek Jeter's play to take first base when he was not actually hit by a baseball. And to that I say, that's baseball.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Good work. Way to come back around to it. I believed in you. I knew you would.
Sure, yeah.
Good hit there. I'm going to end on something you've already heard. Again, it sounds like all these guys are starting as baseball op interns. I'm available. Call me. I'll throw my resume in. Whatever you need from me. But roster construction is my passion in life. So let's have a conversation to all those groups who are looking to hire their next potential GM down the road. Past that, all funny business aside, thank you guys for spending time with us. Make sure to follow, like, and subscribe on your favorite social medias, whether that be X, Instagram, or TikTok. Make sure to share the podcast with your friends. We love talking baseball. We hope you guys love listening to us talk baseball. We're going to continue to bring on the guests. We're going to continue to make sure that our topics are outside of the box so you never get bored. But past that, that is all for us on Baseball Unstitched. Have a great week.